with traditional Greek motifs, bunches of grapes, wreaths, cattle skulls and masks. But above them are the ancient gods of Egypt. There's Isis protecting the sacred bull with her wings, and over here Thoth, the god of wisdom, the falcon-headed Horus tending to the mummy of the dead, and here even the jackal-headed Anubis, the guardian of the dead, wearing Greco-Roman military gear. This then is the strange synthesis that emerged in Greek Egypt.
It was said that Alexander had hoped to create a new world order based on his multiracial ideal of brotherhood among nations. But with hindsight, ironically, we can see that his Hellenistic empire actually laid the cultural foundations of Islam. When he died in Babylon, aged 32, Alexander's body was brought back for burial in a lavish tomb in Alexandria. It's never been found, but the clues point to this tiny mosque in the heart of the old city.
An Arab traveller who came here in the 9th century AD described this place as the Mosque of the Two-Horned Prophet, a strange echo of the ram's horn helmet with which the Egyptian priests of Amun had crowned Alexander the Great. And through the Middle Ages, it was revered not only as the tomb of the prophet Daniel, which is still down there, but also as the tomb of the king and prophet Iskander, Alexander the Great himself. The tunnels and cellars that fan out from underneath this mosque have never been explored properly. But that's not really surprising. The city's absolutely honeycombed with them, and they're really dangerous. There's a great Alexandrian story of the fat bride who, on her wedding procession, fell through a hole in the street and disappeared, and despite the best efforts of the guests, she was never seen again. In 1850, a servant at the Russian consulate came down here and got lost in the corridors. When he came out, he said that he'd seen in a gap in the stonework a chamber with a glass coffin and a human body with a gold diadem round its head and fragments of papyrus everywhere. That description closely matches the last classical witnesses of the tomb of Alexander the Great. But suspiciously so. He was probably lying. Nevertheless, it's an intriguing thought that the solution to the greatest mystery in the history of Alexandria could lie somewhere behind one of these blocked-up corridors.
It's 3 a.m. in the remote monastery of St. Paul, near the Red Sea. The monks begin their devotions before dawn. These are Christian Copts. Their name means Egyptians, and their language and music contain survivals from pharaonic times. Their culture goes back to the early centuries AD, when Egypt became part of a Christian Roman Empire. And even today, they represent nearly 10% of Egypt's population. This church was founded in the 3rd century AD by St. Paul the Anchorite. And with the Christians, we come to the second great foreign transformation of the native culture of the Nile Valley. In late Roman Egypt, An upheaval began as momentous as any political revolution, a change in the psyche of Near Eastern culture which has helped shape the Western mind ever since. A vision of life which believed in withdrawal from the world. Monasticism. At this time, the blue water and emerald fields of the Nile Valley were exchanged for the inhospitable desert. There are strange parallels with our own time, in the widespread feeling that civilization itself had failed. Better cities may arise one day, said the Egyptian philosopher Plotinus. Our children, though conceived in a sinful age, may build better than their fathers. And so the old fabric of pagan culture, the stable cosmos which had sustained Egyptians for so long, was eroded by Christianity, with its appeal not to a great earthly ruler, but to a distant high God. This was a time, said one, when we realized how insecure the human condition is. These fateful changes were mirrored in the way people saw the world. For nearly 1,000 years, classical Mediterranean art had glorified the physical world in the belief that mankind, as the Greeks said, was the measure of all things. Now artists retreat into a crude language of symbols. To us, in the age of Freud and Jung, it looks like a failure of nerve, a loss of faith in the material world, perhaps even deeper psychic trauma. Everything has gone, said Cyprian. Honesty, friendship, skill in the arts, standards in morals. This vast and wonderful world is heading for destruction. And so, with St. Paul of Egypt, the stage was set for fundamentalists of all persuasions to fight over the legacy of the ancients.
Anachorites, chief of the Anchorites, born in the city of Alexandria, AD 228, died AD 343.
A revolution of the mind was now in process. And out of this crisis, a new religion would emerge as the dominant culture of the whole region. In 641, Egypt was conquered by Muslim Arabs bearing a new gospel, that of the Prophet Muhammad. And here in Edfu, the town of Horus, ordinary Egyptian people in their mud brick slums around the temple soon began to abandon the uncertainties of the past for the certainties of a single God, Islam. And so, here in Edfu, in Upper Egypt, as throughout the Mediterranean and Near Eastern worlds, the Christians and the Muslims were the inheritors of the ancients. and their belief in a single God, which the muezzins are chanting now from their minarets, developed out of a tendency long apparent in the ancient world. For the Catholic papacy, the Muslim caliphate, the Orthodox churches of the Greeks and Syrians and Copts all stem from the attempt of men to rule their fellow men and women under a distant, high and all-powerful God. And the effects of that tremendous revolution at the end of the late antique world still shape our lives today. The last Greek religious papyrus from 7th century Egypt sets the seal on that revolution, for it gives in Greek the very words we can hear around us now. In the name of God, the merciful and the compassionate, there is one God and one God alone. And it goes on in Greek, Mahmed apostolos Diou, Muhammad is the apostle of God. With that, to all intents and purposes, the world of the ancient Egyptians had passed. The change to Islam would take many centuries. And out in the countryside, especially in Upper Egypt, the deeper layers of the past are still visible today. It's the eve of the full moon in mid-March, heralding the onset of the heat of summer. And at this time, tens of thousands of people come in from the countryside to descend on the little town of Luxor for a great annual festival. Up here, people still celebrate the ancient feast days, the spring festival, the rising of the Nile, and especially the 40 days of mourning for the dead. But this is the biggest. It's a Muslim festival for an Islamic saint, but it takes place at a mosque inside one of the great pagan temples of ancient Egypt. The Coptic Christians take part too, for they also once had a church inside the temple. The saint himself, Abul Haggag, died in the 11th century, at the point when Islam was becoming the majority religion here. His tomb inside the mosque has been a place of pilgrimage ever since. As everywhere, orthodoxy may demand one thing, but what the people do is another matter. And in the worship of sheikhs and saints, the ordinary people, the fellahin, fill the void between their daily hopes and fears and that distant high God. The night is passed in passionate celebration with the traditional music and songs of Upper Egypt. The two lands may have been united 5,000 years ago, but the south is still a distinct country, and tonight a man from the delta would be a complete stranger here. Next day the festival reaches its climax. The living descendants of the saint lead a huge procession around the ancient temple and its mosque, bearing representations of the coffins of Haggag and his sons. Bringing up the procession are Luxor's guild of ferrymen bearing boats. They're on trucks these days, but nonetheless the ferrymen are discharging their traditional duty, just as their ancestors did thousands of years ago, when around the streets of ancient Luxor they bore the boat of the sun god Amun.